Hello and welcome to the Dynasty Guys Fantasy Football Podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Tim Goins, along with Eric Calvert and Adam Dolan. We're the Dynasty Guys. Hey guys, we're week 7 into the 2019 season. Actually, we're 7 weeks in. This will be coming up week 8. What stood out to you so far? What have you seen that's interesting?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start. I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about Andy Reid and kind of what we're going to see from their offense going forward now with Matt Moore at the helm. I know we talk about this a lot and how kind of we label him and everybody else as this guru, and he's kind of been able to, and he has in the past, obviously. He's always had prolific offenses, or typically. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see kind of his Sean Payton-esque losing your starting quarterback, get to your backup and see what he can do with his offenses and how much of a guru he actually is. So I don't really have any stats. I just kind of wanted to talk about what we'll see from them and what we'll see from the fantasy value of guys like Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. So
yeah, I was listening to a few other podcasts, and they were talking about how Matt Moore was one of the better backup quarterbacks in the league, and that kind of surprised me because he's never really stood out to me. Do you guys know much about Matt Moore and how good he is as a quarterback?
Good.
I would say experienced, not better, maybe. Just watching the game, it didn't look that way. I don't know if he was just kind of in shell shock, but it just kind of looked like mediocre arm, kind of looked like a deer in headlights most of the time, but maybe he'll look better with a week of preparation.
Yeah, I just know him from the Dolphins, and it's really hard to evaluate talent on the Dolphins because they're the Dolphins. So,
yeah, I've got a little bit about him. We're going to talk about here in a minute.
Okay.
Just a few tidbits from his history, but like Adam said, he's been around a while, so he's got some experience, and he's trustworthy. I don't think he's played on the greatest of teams. This is probably the best team he's played on so far. So
they didn't lose any of their offensive weapons other than their quarterback, so you shouldn't expect them to take that huge of a leap backward.
Right.
Yeah, if they do, it shows you who's the problem.
Right.
Okay, well, I'll go on with my most interesting thing, and like Adam's, it's nothing major, but I'm sure a lot of people watched the Dallas-Philadelphia game, and Dallas pretty well handled them.
Yeah.
Dallas pretty well handled them in that game, but they had some chances to make it a game, and the one that stood out to me, and Twitter seems to be going crazy over this, but when Nelson Aguilar beat the safety over the middle, and Wentz throws the ball, and Nelson Aguilar just gives up. I can't explain what he was thinking, because if he just keeps his arms out there, the ball probably hits his hand. If he dives, he's definitely in position to get that. And to me, it was just almost, I'm not an Eagles fan, obviously, but it was frustrating to watch an NFL player that just doesn't seem to care. What did you think? I know you watched the game.
Because, I saw the same. How many views of that did you see?
I saw 3.
Okay, because it seemed like, at least when you were watching the game live, that the view that at least the one I saw on Twitter, the one that's absolutely obvious, it looks like he gator armed it.
Yeah,
makes it look a little worse than it actually was. He was wide open, so I definitely agree with you. I definitely agree it's a lack of effort, but I wasn't sad about it. I can't put my bias aside.
And also, I just thought it was funny that he was the one who gave the pregame speech and told the entire team to play with some emotion.
Right.
So,
well, and there were reports that Alshon was calling people out before the game, or at least Carson Wentz. I don't know if you saw that story.
I did not see that.
Maybe he just didn't say which emotion.
Yeah.
He wasn't clear.
Yeah.
And then, just another side note, Booger McFarland is awful. We didn't think it could get much worse when Jason Witten was in there, but I was telling Adam earlier, the first thing, I didn't catch the very front of the game, so I turned it on. I think there's 11 minutes left in the first quarter or something like that. And the first thing I hear the announcer say, which is Booger McFarland, is Tom Brady needs to get rid of the ball quicker, and that's part of the reason why the Patriots offense has struggled. And I'm like, what is he watching? Because Tom Brady gets rid of the ball probably, I don't know statistically, but I think he is the quickest in the NFL. Yeah. And the Patriots offense has not struggled in any capacity this year. So
I think they ran a little snippet right before he said that showed that they had more success when he got rid of it faster. So that might have been what he's talking about. But yeah, his hashtag analysis is out there in left field. So
all of it's hard to listen to.
Yeah, it is.
But it's funny because when they made that transition and they announced that he was going to take over that role, I'm like, he was horrible on the field.
Yeah.
I mean, they had him on the field last year on the sideline in that little cart or whatever the heck it was. And him and Jason Witten would like battle for who could be the worst.
Yeah.
And I feel like Booger is winning.
Yeah, he definitely is right now. Man.
All right. I have a trivia question for you. All right. So can you name the only NFL player with 5 or more pass attempts and a quarterback rating of 158.3 and has also thrown a touchdown pass to both A.J. Green and Julio Jones?
Adam,
You're gonna take a stab? No, because I can't think of a guess.
Okay, well, when I first saw this, and I'm sure this is wrong because I have no idea how this would happen, but when I first saw this, the thing that instantly popped into my mind is I've seen Odell Beckham throw a lot of really good passes. So that would be my guess, and I have no idea how this would ever happen, but that's just what popped into my head first thought.
I'll give you a hint. You're very close. It is a wide receiver.
Okay.
Yeah, but I just can't think. I'm trying to think in their history.
Who's played with both A.J.
I
Green
know.
and Julio Jones? So who came from Cincinnati and went to Atlanta?
I guess Mo Sanu.
That's what I was.
Mohamed Sanu.
I couldn't even remember him in Cincinnati.
Yeah, that was a long time ago, it seems like.
So now he can add someone else on the Patriots too.
That's funny, yeah.
Interesting.
Well, special thanks to Will McFadden and Dov Kleiman for providing the info for that question. I thought that was interesting. All right, let's get started with the show. We have a great one for you today. We have injury updates, roster moves, trade targets, player projections, all for your Dynasty team. And last but not least, we're going to finish with our player projections segment of the good, the bad, and the ugly. So stay tuned. But first, we want to remind you that for this upcoming Week 8 of the NFL season, the Baltimore Ravens and Dallas Cowboys are on a bye. Also, just as a special note, the Rams and the Bengals game is at Wembley Stadium in England this week, but it doesn't start until 1 p.m. Eastern time, so you're okay. You don't have to get up early to watch that one. But just note that that one is in England. The Washington Redskins and Minnesota Vikings game on Thursday. Be sure to get any of your Thursday night players into your non-flex position. And I just want to state a little bit more than that. When considering your flex positions, when you're putting your players on your roster, look at their starting times, because you always want to play the early players in the regular positions and the later players in the flex. In other words, if you have everyone starting at 1 p.m. or, Eastern time on Sunday, except for maybe 1 or 2 players, and those 2 players are playing either Sunday night or Monday, put those in your flex, because you never know what's going to happen. If you don't put them in your flex and you play a player in your flex early, then you've locked that position up. And I've seen it happen. It's happened to me where you just knew somebody was going to play Monday night or Sunday night, and they didn't, and they were stuck in your wide receiver 1 position, and you'd already played your flex. So, and you didn't, you might have had a running back you could throw in there instead. So anyway, just a good note for those that, are still learning about fantasy football. So anyway, let's get on with the show. First, we want to start with injury reports and roster moves. Eric, what have you got?
All right, so we will start with the Rams, as we always do. I want to say this is Wednesday, so
yes.
Just so you know, more information is going to come, so we don't have the latest information when you may be listening to this. So as of Wednesday, Malcolm Brown is on the injury report as questionable. Same thing as has been for the past few weeks. He didn't play last week, I don't think.
I don't think he did.
He could play this week. No one really knows. So keep an eye on that. Obviously, if Todd Gurley plays, he's probably not that valuable anyhow. But okay, moving on. The Cardinals. Christian Kirk, still questionable. Trending towards playing, seems
Looks like he might play.
So he may be an option finally after I think he's been out 3 weeks now. David Johnson was available to play last week and killed all the fantasy owners that started him because he had 1 rush and didn't touch the ball after that. Chase Edmonds went crazy, and I think they asked Cliff Kingsbury about it, and he basically said, "Look, I played fantasy football before I was a head coach, and I get that it's frustrating, but we have to do what's best for the players." And David Johnson really wasn't in the best of shape to play, and so Chase Edmonds just kind of shouldered that. So it's frustrating, and it's possible that you have the same situation this week. So He didn't practice Wednesday, he being David Johnson, so keep an eye on him.
But you got to play Chase now.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't. If you have him, I would put him in.
Well, we'll talk about him a little bit later.
I was going to say.
Yeah. All right.
So
I agree.
Sticking with their running backs, DJ Foster is questionable. So 2 of their 3 running backs now are hurt, which has kind of cascaded into them signing a few running backs. And my thought is it's probably more for depth. I don't necessarily think it's something that says David Johnson's out for sure, but they did sign Alfred Morris and Zach Zinner. So those are 2 guys that I don't really think have any fantasy value, but it does help that team out and gives them a little bit of depth. It may tell you more about where DJ Foster is than where David Johnson is, but that's definitely something you need to keep an eye on if you're a David Johnson owner. Okay, moving on, the Seahawks. Rashad Penny is questionable, weekly note. And, of course, Will Dissly is now on the IR. 49ers, Deebo Samuel is day-to-day. Same thing as has been for the past week. The Texans, Will Fuller had what they are calling a significant hamstring pull and will be out several weeks. And we know from his long history with hamstring injuries that he will be out for a long time. To me, this is a huge uptick for Kenny Stills and will probably help Kiki Cutie as well. So if they happen to be available or if you think you can get them cheap and you may be a contender, I think Stills especially will be a really solid player as long as he can stay healthy.
Well, not only that, but we know Will Fuller is, an injury. Yeah, he's just always injured. But what you want to be sure and do if you're an owner of him is a dynasty owner is, you can get rid of him if you want to or try to trade him or whatever, but even when he comes back, because he's already dinged up now, it's a little scary to play him until he actually proves for a week or two that he's good to go. So
I would say at this point he's only going to hurt the value of others when he comes back, probably not help your fantasy team.
Probably not.
Well, and he turns into one of those guys, and I don't want to get off on a tangent during this, but just it's the roller coaster scenario to where you deal with them as long as you can, and then finally at some point you say, okay, after a good week, I'm getting rid of this guy because I'm going to get at least what I can out of him. I'm tired of red.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of what it's like let's say he's out 3 weeks. Well, if he comes back the 4th week, you're not going to play him, or you shouldn't. You might not even play him the 5th week, depending on what he does the 4th week. So now you're talking about you're into the fantasy, your playoffs. So, I would expect not to have him until at least your playoffs this year.
Well, and what those players tend to do is, you don't play them that first week. They score 2 touchdowns, and then they get hurt the next week when you do start them. So he's hard to trust for the rest of the season.
Sammy Watkins you, right?
Exactly. Okay, so let's move on. Paris Campbell is still questionable with the abdomen injury for the Colts, but he did put in a limited practice Wednesday, which he hasn't been doing, so there's a little bit of positive trend there. Delaney Walker did not practice Wednesday, same thing as every week. The Jaguars, Marquise Lee is questionable, so he may make his return. I don't know that he's going to help anyone, but again, he might be that guy that hurts the value of a
DJ Chark.
Yeah, DJ Chark and D.D. Westbrook. Couldn't think of that name. So
Hater.
Just keep an eye out. Yeah. Oh, you. So keep an eye out for him. We've talked about their tight ends quite a bit. So O'Shaughnessy went on the IR a few weeks ago, and now Jeff Swaim has been placed on the IR. So we've brought up Oliver a few times now, and if you're still, one of those teams that needs that tight end, he's a possibility. He's at least an athlete that has a chance to do something and has a young quarterback that probably would use him.
I think he's a good one to take a flyer on, that's for sure.
Yeah. And then Nick Foles has been with the scout team and taking part in 7-on-7 drills. So I've seen kind of conflicting reports. I heard originally he was going to remain on the sidelines for the rest of the week, but I heard at some point today he was actually there doing some work. So I don't know if that includes 7-on-7 or what. But I think he is eligible to come back week 11. So you definitely have some more time with Gardner Minshew, and they're going to have another one of those tough decisions, much like Cam Newton and Kyle Allen. Who were they going to go with? So just keep an eye on that. Packers, Devontae Adams still has the toe injury. If he comes back, you play him. If not, you just hope for the best. And then with the Jets, Chris Herndon still has a hamstring injury and is questionable, but he did put in a limited practice on Wednesday. And then Sam Darnold hurt his toe in the New England game and had a limited practice on Wednesday, but I think it was Monday afternoon or Tuesday afternoon. Adam Gase said that he's going to be fine. So I wouldn't stress about it too much, but definitely keep an eye on it.
Other than the ghosts.
So,
those will haunt you.
Yeah.
Okay, for the Falcons, Ito Smith is out this week, so don't play him. Matt Ryan, ankle sprain. He's not ruled out as of today. In fact, I've heard reports that they kind of expect him to try to play, so we'll see. Again, like Eric said, watch the injury reports all the way up until the game time because it can change any minute. They also traded Mohamed Sanu to the Patriots, which we talked about Sanu a while ago. That's kind of why he was one of our trivia questions. So we can talk about that more later if you want, but that's kind of an interesting transaction there. So anyway, we're going to move on to the Panthers. Cam Newton still rehabilitating. No word yet on when he might return to the starting lineup. Wide receiver DeAndre White signed to active roster. He's bounced around the NFL since 2015, played for San Francisco and Houston before landing with the Panthers practice squad last year. Actually, on the last game of the preseason, he led all the Panther receivers with 4 catches for 94 yards. So he's a decent player, but he's not really been fantasy relevant in the regular season. And barring injury to other playmakers, they got some really good playmakers on that squad, as I'm sure everybody knows. He's probably not going to be this year, so he's not somebody we're suggesting you add to the roster. I just wanted to bring him up because if you hear about him, you'll wonder, well, who is he? Well, that's who he is. So also, rookie Greg Dortch was also signed to the active roster from the Jets practice squad. He's more of a punt return specialist. He played that role for Wake Forest last year. So I don't really see him in the role as a wide receiver either. So I'd stay away from him unless, something changes, but we'll keep you abreast of that.
If you told me there was a football player named Greg Dortch and said around what time did he play?
Yeah.
Before the 50s, for
sure. That'd be an old-time name for sure. For the Broncos, I'm sure everybody's heard by now, but Emmanuel Sanders was traded to the 49ers. So that's interesting too. For the Chiefs, Sammy Watkins is still listed as questionable. So we really don't know if he's going to play or not. And
don't play him if he does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in case you missed it, Patrick Mahomes suffered a dislocated kneecap. Hope we didn't jinx him by putting his jersey up on the wall. But although there's no timetable for his return, it appears that kind of with each passing day, there appears to be more optimism that his absence will be shortened. So, we're holding out hope. But in the meantime, Matt Moore, we talked about him a while ago. He's going to fill in as he did last week when Mahomes went down. As Adam alluded to, Matt's been a decent backup quarterback over the years. He's been in the NFL since 2007. He's played for Carolina and Miami before landing in Kansas City. Perhaps his best year was in 2011 in Miami when he played in 13 games. He had 348 attempts, 211 completions, and 2,500 yards. That was accompanied with 16 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. And that was Miami. So, with a better offense, and that year he also rushed for 72 yards and another 2 touchdowns. So, you're not gonna get the same production from him as you did from Mahomes, obviously. But with Tyreek, Travis Kelce, Demarcus Robinson, Watkins, McCole Hardman, I'm gonna say they're still gonna be pretty decent, pretty serviceable. I would definitely not bench them. Unless you just have somebody else really good to put in. So, also in the wake of the Patrick Mahomes injury, quarterback Kyle Shermer has been signed to the active roster, but again, he's not somebody you necessarily want to add right now. Travis Benjamin for the Chargers, wide receiver, he was put on injured reserve. For the Patriots, tight end Ryan Izzo and Matt Lacoste, along with Rex Burkhead are still listed as questionable. Just found out moments ago that Josh Gordon has been put on the IR. So he's out probably for the rest of the season. I'm not sure. It was a knee injury. I think it's 2 players that you can call back from IR a year. So I'm not sure. They have a lot of people on IR now. So it'll just depend on.
His were bone spurs or something they found. Yeah.
Oh, were they?
Yeah, what I saw was knees.
Yeah, it was a knee.
Both knees.
Yeah.
Which is
Wow.
Not fun.
And, of course, as we reported last week, the Patriots signed tight end Ben Watson to the active roster. You might have watched him Monday night. He had 3 catches on 5 targets for 18 yards on one of the 4th or 5th targets that hit him in the face mask. That was kind of interesting. He did not catch that one. But, everyone knew he was going to need a little time to reacclimate. In fact, they even talked about Brady saying as much. So they kind of expected him not to really do much more than that. But he was on the field for 75% of the snaps. So he could even see more playing time. So, like Eric was talking about a while ago, if you need a tight end, and you're trying to find somebody like Josh Oliver or somebody like that, Ben Watson's probably going to be a good one to put in there because we know the Patriots like to use their tight ends. They don't really have anybody right now. And Ben Watson has been serviceable over the years. So I would definitely, if you're, like I said, if you're just hurting for somebody, pick him up.
Well, I'm not so sure. This is just a point that doesn't really need to be made. But I'm not so sure that if you put their defense out there the whole game, they would score more points than like a Miami. I mean, I would definitely put money on that. I mean, their defense has been unbelievable scoring touchdowns this year and taking the ball away, obviously.
Yeah, they've been extremely
They have a touchdown
good.
every week.
You're not wrong. For the Saints, wide receiver Traquan Smith, tight end Jared Cook, and Alvin Kamara and Drew Brees are all listed as questionable. Although Brees is, I think, listed now as a game-time decision. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. For the Raiders, Tyrell Williams is still listed as questionable. For the Bucs, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they signed wide receiver Amara Darboh to the active roster. Just FYI, he was a 3rd-round draft pick by Seattle in 2017. His rookie year, he had 8 receptions on 13 targets for 71 yards. Last year, he did nothing. However, in Bruce Arians' offense, we know they like to throw the ball. Obviously, they have Evans and Goodwill. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are the go-to guys in the offense, obviously. But, in tough matchups, you never know. They could work in a 3rd receiver. I think they do like to set up in 3 receiver sets. So, Darboh may be somebody you want to keep an eye on. Obviously, if they start using him, you might want to throw him on there. We always talk about wide receivers coming kind of into their own in their 3rd season. This is his 3rd season. He could be a complete bust, but he could be good. So we don't know. We'll have to see.
Well, I think I saw something that they may be getting rid of Rashad Perryman because of the price that he's going to cost them. So he could have an easy slot as a starter.
Right.
He
pretty
could
just
soon.
walk right into it.
Yeah.
Sure. That's what I've got. Go ahead.
So I'll get into Washington. Adrian Chris Thompson, questionable for the game against Minnesota. Vernon Davis, doubtful, but he hasn't played since week 4 against New York. So if he plays, you're not playing him against Minnesota anyway.
Yep.
Darius Geis, he's on the IR, but he's getting close to return. So that's the word on the street. We'll see as that moves forward. And I just put a note about Bryce Love here because he was out from the beginning of the season, or he was put on the PUP list. So he's expected to undergo some cleanup on his knee, but I definitely just wanted to put him down as a roster guy to look at. Obviously, in the Dynasty perspective, I'm assuming that people have him on their roster, but this may be a good guy to go get. Washington seems to be looking for that guy to step up. Adrian can only last so much longer, so
we keep saying that. He keeps hanging around.
He can. Father Time will get there eventually. We say that about Tom Brady too, but anyway, so definitely a good guy to look at. Maybe go get for cheap right now. Great talent in college, obviously. So for Philadelphia, Deshaun and Sproles are both questionable. Deshaun hasn't played since week 2, in which I'm pretty sure he got hurt that week because I don't think he had any targets for any catches.
Yeah.
So we will just monitor him moving forward. I mean, I think he's a startable guy once he comes back, but it's definitely a Will Fuller situation where you're going to have to see him do it for a few weeks before you actually feel comfortable to put him in your lineup.
Well, and Deshaun really helps Carson Wentz.
Right.
If he's got that guy that can beat the defense deep, that helps Carson Wentz a lot. So if you're a Wentz owner, you definitely hope that he comes back soon.
For sure. So on to the Giants. Sterling Shepard's questionable. He's free of concussion symptoms for the last 2 weeks, but he's waiting for medical clearance. So I think that's important. So we'll have to get that before he can play. Evan Ingram, he's not on the injury report, but just watching the game last week, he got poked in the eye. And that doesn't sound like a big deal until you actually see what his eye looked like.
Yeah.
So just monitor that as we move forward. He'll probably show up questionable or in some limited fashion during the week. So make sure and keep an eye on him. And same thing with Saquon. He's not on the injury report, but we know that he had to miss a few plays for tweaking, retweaking. We don't know the extent of his ankle injury, so just keep an eye on him also.
Yeah, and I want to say, because we're doing this on Wednesday, they don't have to be on the injury report yet, so they very well could show up tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, so on to Pittsburgh, Mason Rudolph looks like he's going to be available for the Miami game, so expect him to play from what we're seeing. And I think he's a pretty good streamable option this week. I mean, if you don't have anything else, he's definitely a guy to at least look at. James Conner's also not on the injury report, but as you just stated, it is Wednesday, so we know he was used quite heavily before the bye week. So, and he had a quad injury, or he was getting nicked up. It seemed like every hit he was taking was a huge one. So definitely keep an eye on him. Jalen Samuels is doubtful, and James Washington is questionable, who's been very underwhelming anyway. So, but I know the OSU fans at the table were really hoping for a Mason Rudolph and James Washington connection as we move forward. So.
Yeah, it just hasn't come to fruition yet.
Cincinnati, AJ Green's doubtful. We're hearing, or I'm reading, that he's likely out through the trade deadline, October 29th. So we're not seeing any word. Zach Taylor's basically saying, I want to see him practice. Quit asking me questions.
I mean, at this point, does he even come back this year?
They're
not going to be in the playoffs.
Right.
So if you can't...
would we be surprised if they moved him for pieces? I think that is the more likely scenario than him even being a Bengal next year. So
I think the problem is, can you move him if he's legitimately injured and this isn't a Jalen Ramsey thing? What can you get for him? It's not what he's worth.
Yeah, I mean, but look at somebody like a Mohamed Sanu just moved to the Patriots. I think the Patriots would give AJ Green a 1-year deal to kind of prove it deal, basically, to see what's going on. There are a few teams out there that are contenders or on the verge. I mean, look at a 49ers team that could definitely use, I know they just signed Emmanuel, but they could still use somebody like an AJ Green maybe at the end. A prove it deal, obviously. On to Cleveland. Kareem Hunt practiced Monday for the first time since preseason. I know any Kareem Hunt owner is very excited to get him back and see maybe how they're going to fit him into the offense and how the Chubb-Kareem Hunt situation is going to work out. So we definitely know there's a lot of talent there, but there's only so many carries that they can have in those games. But we'll see how that works moving forward. Baltimore, Marquise Brown's questionable. He should be ready after the bye week. Kerryon Johnson obviously was put on the IR. This was the big story the past few days, or this morning. It feels like the past few days.
Yeah, it does.
The obvious ads or obvious handcuffs are J.D. McKissick and Ty Johnson, which what we're hearing from Detroit or Matt Patricia is that they're going to be following the running back by committee type situation in their backfield. So I think both of those guys are definitely worth a roster spot, at least for right now, to kind of see how they're used moving forward. But even Kerryon the bell cow there was not exactly winning weeks for you.
Yeah, well, he wasn't a bell cow.
Right.
Everyone expected him to be, and he was the best running back, but you saw Ty Johnson kind of became their goal line back, which took away a lot of what Kerryon offered for his upside.
Right. Well, and it seems, just from watching the games, that they tend to just trust the ball in Matt Stafford's hand more. Yeah. I mean, they go into this season talking up their run game and how they're going to be a lot more balanced on offense, but it just seems that when times get tough, they put the ball in Matt Stafford's hands and throw the ball. And I don't blame them, for sure. So on to the Vikings. They play Thursday night. Adam Thielen is officially out. I'm pretty sure I saw that right before I walked in here. So he will not be playing. And I have a note for... I can't pronounce his name, and I don't want to butcher it.
O. Johnson.
Yes, O. Johnson. We'll go with that for right now. But he's a rookie out of Colorado State. Looked good, obviously. And I think as long as Thielen's not in there, you definitely at least move him up in your depth chart in your dynasty ranking. So he's definitely a guy to watch and see what happens and put him on your roster and see what happens moving forward. That offense, we've talked a lot about that offense in past weeks, and I think we're finally seeing what can happen when they actually let Kirk Cousins throw the ball and prove that he's worth that huge contract that they gave him. Yeah, so that's it for me.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the next part of the segment and talk about players that are trending up and trending down. We're going to talk about the players trending up first. I've got Emmanuel Sanders. Of course, he's been good for years, but he was kind of stuck in Denver for the last few years. And, I mean, even though he had some decent production, his quarterback support has been bad. So being traded to the 49ers, they really like him. I know the coach there really loves him. they don't really, in my opinion, have any wide receivers that are anywhere close to Emmanuel Sanders' talent level. He's going to step into that number one position immediately. I'm sure they're going to get him in as much as they can. I see him, I don't even have a guess as really, because I want to see how much they actually use him, but I just have a strong feeling that he's really going to explode.
Yeah, I agree. I think really the only downside for Emmanuel Sanders is that's a run-first team. They're going to try to run the ball, so the passing attack is limited. And, of course, you have George Kittle, who's probably going to always be the number one read. But Emmanuel Sanders, we kind of talked about kind of getting old and long in the tooth. He's old, but the guy is still amazingly good.
Well, he's only 32.
Yeah.
So, he's got several years left.
Well, yeah, when I say I'm saying he's had some injuries that have kind of built up over his career that have, in theory, should slow him down, but it really hasn't. He's done a really good job rehabbing from those, and I agree. I think he could be a top 12 wide receiver talent-wise in the NFL. So he has a wide range of outcomes, but I definitely see some upside there.
Well, the only thing I'm going to say to the run first part is that's also what the Vikings said. We want to be a run heavy offense, and yet they have talented wide receivers that wanted the ball and they tried to get them to him. So even though the 49ers still, I agree with you that they want to run the ball, but I still think that having someone of Sanders' caliber is going to open up that passing game enough that Shanahan's going to want to exploit it. So.
Well, and to move on that point, I think it's a perfect situation for him because when you have the ability, I think they're second in the league in rush yards per game at 173. When you have the ability to run the football like that, and you have a receiver like Emmanuel Sanders who is not the big-bodied guy, but he's the quick guy. He runs crisp routes. He's in and out of his breaks. They're going to be having to man coverage him or playing 0 and 1 coverages against him. So I think that definitely plays in his favor, and we know the targets are going to be there. They got Kyle Shanahan. They want to throw the football.
Yeah.
And even with as woeful as their passing game has been, they're still 11th in the league in points. They score 26 points per game. And I definitely think this is one of the pieces that they needed to maybe step into that elite tier of as far as points go.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go with my turning up players. Mine are kind of lower. I don't want to say they're not high caliber players, but they're definitely not guys that you're going to be starting anytime soon, but they could be guys that you want to keep your eye on and maybe put on your roster when you can get them cheap to see what happens. So the first one I have here is Jacoby Myers. He's finished the last 2 weeks with 54 and 47 yards. Some of that production was obviously due to Gordon being out, but Gordon is now on the IR. So, we've got Sanu coming in, and he very well could knock Jacoby Myers out of this. But you start to see this chemistry between Brady and Jacoby where he's trusting him. He goes to him on third downs on slant routes where, if he misses, it's over. So not saying he's great right now, but definitely someone to keep an eye on because in that offense, pretty much anyone is valuable. And then, so the next guy that I have is Zach Pascal. I just kind of hadn't been paying much attention to him, but his last 4 games, he's had 12.3, 9.2. He had a dud with 2.5, and then last week had a 25.6 point game. 3 of those 4 are pretty solid, and he's starting to show some consistency, and he's doing it with a quarterback that is looking for that chemistry because he's still kind of getting acclimated, and Brissett's been really good. But Pascal has, kind of started to step up as one of his go-to options. And he's really young. I think this is his 3rd year, and as we talked about the 3rd year breakout, he has a chance to really step up into that role. So keep an eye out for him. And
how do you see Paris Campbell cutting into his production if he comes
It's
back?
really hard to say because we've never seen them on the field together, or at least not much.
Right.
So, yeah, again, Paris Campbell could come back and Zach Pascal could, go away. It just depends. But like I was saying, these guys are free. Go pick them up if you have the spot.
And absolutely. I just wondered, for what your opinion was on that. So.
Right, and I would ask the same question about Jacoby Myers and N'Keal Harry coming back. It's what are we going to see from him? I know I have him, so I'm excited, but I have no idea what to expect from N'Keal Harry and how they're going to use him. I definitely think the Josh Gordon injury helps him, but we'll see. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, we're throwing darts here, just trying to hope we hit on one.
Right.
And with that in mind, with Sanu gone from the Falcons, he was their third option, but he's been a good fantasy option a lot of time. So there's really two guys that are going to compete for that spot is Justin Hardy and Russell Gage. I think Justin Hardy is probably going to be the one to fill that position, but when I watch them, Russell Gage looks like the better player to me. So it's kind of a toss-up, and again, probably not someone you want to add right away, but keep an eye on them and see if you see their production going up, and if you do, maybe you can get them before everyone else realizes.
Did they give a timetable on Matt Ryan's return? I know he's got a sprained ankle, but they don't know the severity.
I have not heard yet.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and pick it up. We talked about this guy a little earlier, and it's pretty obvious, but it's Kenny Stills is trending up for me. So, I mean, obviously, plain and simply, Will Fuller is one of those guys that, knock on wood, I feel bad for him. I don't wish injury on anybody, but tends to, when he gets hurt, he isn't one of those guys that shows up and plays. For whatever reason. I mean, he missed, 10 games last year, weeks 9 through 16. And I think, just from what I felt last year, and a lot of the Will Fuller owners last year felt like, okay, he gets injured, he hurts his knee, it's the football season, you're going to get nicked up a little bit, but we expect to see him back in, I'll give him a month, 4 or 5 weeks. And that just doesn't seem to happen with him.
Yeah.
So he's got an easy schedule coming up for the next month. Or very favorable, at least, Kenny Stills does. So he's definitely a good ad right now, but I think he's a good ad for the rest of the season at least.
Yeah, and even when they were both playing, Stills looked like the better receiver to me a lot of times. I saw Will Fuller drop 2 or 3 touchdowns, and I was just like, man.
You text me.
Yeah, it was driving me crazy because I have Deshaun Watson, and they were wide open touchdowns that he dropped, and then I think Duke Johnson ended up running 2 of those in, and I didn't win that week because of that. But,
he's not bitter.
I'm glad you didn't text me because I was crying because I had Fuller, so yeah.
Well, I was playing against Fuller, so I said, I'm glad.
Yeah, I agree with you, and being a Fuller owner, it hurts, but I actually think Stills has a chance to beat Fuller out for the rest of, I don't want to say time, but while he's on the team and being productive, to take over that number 2 spot and hold on to it.
I agree.
Because he is talented. And maybe it's my bias, I wouldn't go as far as say as I thought he looked better than Fuller. I think Fuller still was recovering from his injury last year, but Stills, we know what he can do. So yeah, I agree with you. In fact, I've got him on one of our other segments, and I'm going to talk about him some more. But yeah, completely agree.
I'll go ahead and pose this question, and we don't have to talk too long about it. But if you're the Kenny Stills owner, I mean, what exactly do you do with him? Like, for instance, if you're a wide receiver heavy team, where does Kenny Stills actually fit on your team? Is it a matchup based thing? Hey, I'm going to throw this guy out there and I'm just going to hope for the high ceiling? Or are we saying this guy, I feel like, is an actual startable option in my flex, even if I am wide receiver heavy?
I'm going to say until Will Fuller comes back, he's probably around a wide receiver 20, 24 guy, which to me says he's startable in most lineups. Unless you just happen to have really good wide receivers, you're probably going to start him a lot.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I just was curious what you guys thought about it.
I was going to say an easy wide receiver too. Yeah. And if they're in a tough matchup, he might be somebody you play someone else over, but I'm not sure what their rest of their schedule looks like, but I would definitely play him if I had him.
Yeah.
So do you have a trending down player?
Yeah. I've got the trending down over here, and I'm very sad to say this, but it's David Montgomery. And, obviously, I think we're going to talk about him in just a little bit. I think you have him in another segment.
I do.
More positive segment. Yeah. But it's not necessarily the lack of production. It's more or less what you're seeing on the field. I mean, the fact that he's tied to Mitchell Trubisky in that offense, the only person that Mitchell Trubisky is good for is the opposing defense, it seems like. And I don't know. You just watch the games, and he seemed to be taking over that first and second down back role. As we first watched them, or at least the first few games, it didn't seem like that was going to be the case. But now it seems like, he gets a little volume, he gets 20 carries, but he averages 2.5 yards a carry, and they can't move the football. So I just think, for me, he's trending down, and you definitely don't get rid of him. We definitely see the upside, we definitely see the talent, but that offense just is not giving him. He's not even getting the volume of touches to actually produce as a fantasy running back outside of a random touchdown. So I think that's definitely the disappointing part about Montgomery.
Well, you brought up Trubisky, and he is definitely to blame, but Matt Nagy has been awful. I think last week David Montgomery had 2 carries.
I think Cohen outcarried him. 3.
Yeah.
I think he had 3 carries.
So, and then you hear in the press conference where Matt Nagy says, well, it's obvious that we need to run the ball more, and almost got mad when people, kind of said, hey, why aren't you running the ball? And then says it's obvious we need to run the ball more. Well, he's the guy in charge of that. Only he can fix that. And this has happened, I think this happened week 2, where they just threw the ball 40 times in a row or something like that.
Right.
So it's definitely some to do with Trubisky, but Matt Nagy, we all kind of touted him as this offensive guru coming into the season, but it's been bad this year.
Well, and it's a very finger-pointy type situation.
Yeah.
I mean, when you watch the game, they come out at halftime, and you've got the announcer that talked to him coming out of the break, and they're basically saying, well, he's just pissed at his offense. I mean, they're not clicking, it's not working. They've got to turn it around, basically, and it almost feels like Matt Nagy is blaming his players. He doesn't seem to be one of those guys that wants to take the blame. And I think that reflects in his press conferences after the game. He thinks, well, I'm doing all I can. These guys are not performing the way they should. So that's definitely not a good sign for that offense. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw them try to go out and get a guy like a Cam Newton. You heard it here first. But I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying I think that team feels like they're a quarterback away from the Super Bowl, at least the conference championship game.
And I think they could be.
Right.
It's possible.
Maybe they trade for Cam Newton and Kareem Hunt.
Yeah. No.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the next segment. These are trade targets. Eric, what do you got?
Okay, well, I don't necessarily have a specific trade target like go and get this guy, but we're kind of getting into the time of the year now where you have an understanding of how good your team is and how good the rest of the league is. Especially in Dynasty, you might already know that going into the year, but if you're in a startup or, whatever the case may be, you're getting a feel for where you're at, where you're going to fall. So that greatly influences who you're trying to trade for. So if you think you're a contender, I think you need to go get those guys that are older, that people want to still get some value out of, that will be very good this year. And so I have a list of guys like Devonta Freeman, John Brown, Mark Ingram, Julian Edelman. If you can get those guys, they're going to produce this year. That helps you this year, but you have to know it's hurting you in the future because you're going to have to give up something valuable to get them. But that at least puts you in the spot that you might actually be able to make a run. On the flip side of that, if you're rebuilding and you have these guys, you're trying to get rid of them and get picks or young talent that you can get in exchange. And if you can get a pick and a young player, that's even better. So depending on where you're at, and if you're at the mid to lower, maybe you feel like, okay, I've had some bad luck. I still feel like I'm a contender. Sure, go for it. But one thing you have to weigh in Dynasty is these things don't change quickly. There's not a lot of players on the waiver wire to go out and make your team better instantly. So you have to build your team through trades and through drafting. So if you have these guys that are going to age out before your team matures the way you want it to, get rid of them when they have some value.
Well, and I'm going to go ahead and add on to this because, and that's maybe an unpopular opinion, I think, but I want to throw this guy, you had mentioned if you're rebuilding, trying to get rid of some of these guys and get draft picks out of them. And I would throw a guy like Mohamed Sanu in the category as a sell. I think, and this is just my opinion of him, I think he's going to be great for that offense for the next few weeks. But I'm not sure that I see, or at least see the long-term value of Mohamed Sanu. It seems like they just kind of run through their wide receivers over there. If you're not Randy Moss, it just seems like they kind of just run through you. So I'm not sure that his value is going to be much higher than it is with the hype that's coming from this trade. So I think this is a perfect opportunity to sell him to a contender that feels like, oh, they're a wide receiver away, he's going to a great situation, and get the value while you can.
Yeah, if you can sell the idea that he's the Josh Gordon replacement and he will do what Josh Gordon did, for sure.
Which is a seeable thing. It's not like you're reaching thinking that. The person that's buying Mohamed Sanu is not buying zero value. He's buying value and you're buying upside, but we just haven't seen it yet. So I just think his value is higher now than it will be in the next few weeks or after.
Well, and even if you don't get a great pick back for Mohamed Sanu, I mean, if you get a third-round pick and it's an early third round, that's probably decent value for him because you're probably not going to play him. And if you can hit on one of those people like a DJ Chark that no one saw coming, obviously that helps your team out. So for me, I agree. I would sell him if you can get what you consider value out of him.
Okay. Let's move on to our next segment. This is a Dynasty Outlook segment, so kind of extends out of what we just talked about. But these are players that you kind of might be freaking out over, or at least concerned with, what their future holds. The first one we're going to talk about is Sony Michel.
All right, so I'm a Sony Michel owner in a Dynasty League, and he is one of the weirdest players to own because he's currently the number 16 running back. He has 390 rushing yards, and the big thing, 6 touchdowns. When you watched him last year, you expected this huge breakout because of the way they used him in the playoffs. He was getting receiving work. This year, he's averaging 1 target per game and has 51 yards with 0 touchdowns. Also, on top of that, his snap percentage is only 41%. So when you bought Michel thinking that he was going to be the young talent that the Patriots paid up for, which they don't do on running backs.
And his price tag was high.
Yeah, it was very high.
Should have been. I mean, rightfully so.
And so you've got this guy who essentially is a lot like LeGarrette Blount was when he was on the Patriots. So where does that put him? I have a little tidbit here. He ranks second behind, this really surprised me, Phillip Lindsay with the amount of rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line this year, and is first in the amount of attempts inside the 10-yard line. So you look at that and you say, okay, he plays for a great offense and he's getting the attempts. He should be pretty viable, but it's hard to play him every week with any confidence. So where do you guys lay on him?
I mean, I have very mixed emotions about this because I think my gut would tell me sell him high, but I still don't think you can get the value out of him that you needed or that you basically went out and got him for.
Right.
So I almost feel like to counter exactly what I just said, I'm gonna keep on him. I think you keep him, they're gonna run the football, especially as we move in further on into the season. It almost feels like Bill Belichick is just like clowning with people, it just seems like they do the exact opposite of what you think they're gonna do. And but to your point, you're almost surprised when you see him out there on the field getting carries. It's almost like he goes out there and him and James White look so similar that you can't tell if he's catching the ball or if he's running the ball. So I'm of the mindset that I'm keeping him, at least for the next few weeks, hoping that he continues the touchdown trend, because if he does, then I say you sell him and try to get the value out of him, because I definitely agree. He is a roller coaster of emotions trying to play him and count on him every week.
He is. Tim, where are you at on
I agree. I agree with pretty much everything you're saying. I wonder how Brady is going to react to the mistakes that Sony's been making. I know in the game Monday night, he hit him right in the hands basically with a pass that should have gone for a touchdown, inside the 20 or something like that, and he just dropped it. I mean, he looked away as he was catching the ball, and Brady was not happy. And I know, to me, and probably to Belichick, that's as bad as a turnover.
Yeah.
And he hates those. So if he keeps not getting better, that's poor phraseology right there. But if he doesn't start producing better and improving, I don't know that he's going to get a lot of more chance.
Yeah.
More chances. I think they may rein him in a little bit, and he may just become one of those guys like all the rest of them that just get a few plays a game.
Well, and so now that you bring that up, another, to me, red flag is he's done pretty well the past few weeks, but Rex Burkhead has been hurt. When Burkhead comes back, how does that adjust what is happening with him? I mean, does Burkhead take away a few of those goal line carries? Because if so...
Because Brandon Bolden's already doing
right. I mean, and it feels like every time there's a chance it's Brandon Bolden.
I think
obviously it's not. But it's really hard to watch almost when you're rooting for Sony Michel, because it feels like everything is going against him. And then as you watch the game, he just doesn't look good. He doesn't have that explosiveness that he had last year. I don't know. Maybe he's injured, and maybe that's part of the problem. It's crazy to say. I'm almost hoping, because he looks bad enough that I feel like that's a possibility. But he's just one of those guys that, to me, is at the end of the year, he's going to finish as a really high running back. But to play him week to week, it's really hard to trust him.
I hope they bring on Damian Harris. So
I think he looks a lot better.
I'd like to.
I mean,
see
he only
him.
has a handful of carries, but to me looks a lot more explosive.
I'd like to see him play,
especially over Brandon Bolden. Come on.
I know.
Anyhow, I agree. So the next guy that we're going to discuss here is Aaron Rodgers. I know Adam has strong feelings for Aaron Rodgers. So, Adam, let's go ahead and kick off the Aaron Rodgers discussion.
So we brought this up last week, and I had him as a trade away target, or at least I think it was just a trending down guy. But I feel even more strongly, I don't know if that's actually correct verbiage either, but I feel stronger about that statement now. I mean, I think coming off of a 5-6 total touchdown game against Oakland, even watching the game, it almost just felt like an aberration. It felt like, to me, I'm not saying he's not going to have these huge games, but I just think still his value right now is at its absolute peak. You know, he's got all this MVP buzz. If you have anybody that's a viable option, like I mentioned last week, a Matt Stafford, or there's lots of guys in that category, the Dak Prescotts.
Kirk Cousins.
Yes, Kirk Cousins. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of guys that are out there that are QB2s, basically, in our fantasy leagues that I would definitely, if you have anybody that's a startable option that's not just a streamed quarterback, I would definitely look to get rid of Aaron Rodgers and get the most value you can.
So he's currently the number 7 quarterback on the year after having a 50-point game. Well, close to 50 points, whatever it was. To me, that says that he's really not returning the value that you expected from him because, you know, in a startup draft, I don't know, he was probably drafted around the 5 to 7 quarterback, and this is after coming off of a huge game where some quarterbacks have already had their bye weeks. So I agree. I think he's a sell, and if you can do it right now, this is probably the highest his value is going to be for the remainder of his career.
Right.
Well,
and here's another point too. Now that you bring that up, you know, a lot of times when we watch these games, and obviously we're looking at it on a fantasy standpoint, we don't care. We care how they score. They don't care how they score.
Right.
And I think they have at least 2 touchdowns inside the 5-yard line. And those could have easily been Aaron Jones runs into the end zone that changes his score completely. So I think we saw the Aaron Rodgers of old as far as they're going to put the ball in his hands, whether they're at the 1-yard line, the 10-yard line, it doesn't matter. So I just don't think that that's going to be the continued trend moving forward. And that's why I basically say that we just do not see that reliance upon him like we used to.
I agree. I think to your point, if you have another quarterback that you're comfortable starting and you can turn Rodgers for something, get a different player that, you know, perhaps a tight end or something that, you know, you've had another one get hurt or whatever, I would for sure, you know, move him. But if you can't, you know, I would probably hold on to him. I mean, you're obviously not going to cut him or drop him, but I think, I guess the upside that I see is he's with a new coach. We're just kind of seeing what they're doing now. They've got a good defense. You know, now the offense seems to be producing a little bit more. They kind of relied on the defense the first 6 weeks, right?
Yeah,
and then, or 5 weeks. And the last couple, they've kind of come out of their shell a little bit on offense. But, you know, he's got his wide receivers getting hurt and whatnot. So it'll be interesting to see how it progresses moving forward. And if the coach gives him the green light on throwing the ball more, feeling comfortable with that in this new system, he's still very talented. So, you know, I don't think you're making a mistake if you hold on to him, especially if you can't get much for him.
Yeah, I feel like he may be a really good option in the trade away if you're rebuilding, and maybe try to get a hold of if you think you can win this year.
Sure, right.
He may be one of those type of players.
Well, and so I knew I'd looked at this before, but I went and looked at their schedule. And like I said, I'm talking more on the dynasty aspect. I just think this further proves my point that right now I just feel like he's going to be at what the peak he's going to be at. In the next 7 weeks, he plays 4 top 10 defenses that are against the opposing quarterback. So I think, you know, give him a few bad weeks, and I just feel like you're losing out on the value that you could have had. So I just kind of wanted to make sure and point that out, that he's got a really tough schedule moving forward.
Well, yeah, and so what you're saying basically is this is his highest value.
Yes, that's what I mean. Sell him now.
And I agree with that, because he's not going to have another. I mean, he had 6 touchdowns, right? 1 rushing, 5 throwing. So he's not going to do that again this year.
Yeah, and of course he did it the week where all of his wide receivers were hurt.
Right,
you know?
Right. Well, and it's against the 30th ranked defense against opposing quarterbacks. I mean, not that he's going to do that, and not that he shouldn't or should do that, but obviously he took advantage of a very plus matchup.
Right.
So.
Right. Okay, so there's our opinions on those guys. We're going to move on to the next segment. This is called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. These are our player projections that we're going to give for this next upcoming week. The good are players that we feel like are obviously going to have a good week. The bad are players, obviously, going to have a bad week. And the ugly players are players that we feel like you may not want them in your lineup. They might kind of look ugly in there, but we actually feel like they're going to have a good week. So, start them with confidence.
You'll never see Jimmy Garoppolo in the ugly section.
Yeah. So, Adam, why don't you get us kicked off here?
Okay, yeah, so I'll start with I have a combination of two guys, basically, but DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. I mean, I'm plain and simple. They're playing Atlanta, who's the 29th ranked defense against opposing wide receivers. I mean, and they're obviously tied to an MVP candidate in Russell Wilson, who's absolutely playing unbelievable this year. So I definitely think you start those guys with confidence. I know as the Lockett owner, you get really frustrated that it seems like they refuse to target him, and he always has some outlandish touchdown that he scores. But
or when they finally do hyper target him, he doesn't have the touchdown.
Right, yeah.
It's like, yeah, he got his 12 points again.
He's very high floor, high ceiling, but they refuse to give him the ball.
Yeah.
So, but I think definitely start both those guys with confidence this week.
All right, so my player this week is John Brown. Brown has actually been really good this year. I don't think people realize how good he's been. He has not had a game where he's had less than 50 yards or 5 targets. He's currently the number 19 wide receiver, and he's playing the Eagles this week, who in the past 2 weeks have allowed Amari Cooper, who is injured, 6 catches for 106 yards, and Stephon Diggs, that can't be right.
Oh, no.
167 yards and 3 touchdowns. And then it doesn't end there. When they played Devontae Adams and Julio, they both went crazy on them too. So this is just a great matchup for somebody who may be kind of under the radar. People don't realize how good he's been. So start him with some confidence this week.
Sounds good. So I'm going to talk about a couple of guys up against the Giants defense, which we've watched is completely porous. And, of course, Chase Edmonds ran all over him last week. So we're talking about Detroit Lions. And we talked about these guys earlier, at least Ty Johnson earlier, but I'm saying look for both Ty Johnson and Kenny Golladay to have a good game. Now, I know Marvin Jones caught 4 touchdown passes this past week.
They refused to cover him.
Yeah. I don't think the Giants are going to be that ridiculous with their coverage. So, I was trying to choose my words cautiously there. I think they're going to cover him, or at least try. And he's a good receiver, but I don't think he's as good as Kenny Golladay. And so wide receiver ones have done pretty decent against the Giants. So I look for both of those guys. And I'm taking Ty Johnson over J.D. McKissic because I just feel like they trust him a little bit more, and they gave him a little bit more opportunity in the last game, and I just feel like he's going to be the one that goes off for this game. So
are you taking Lions backfield over Chase Edmonds? Like, say you're wavering and you have the option to pick Ty Johnson or McKissic, or you have Chase Edmonds. Which one are you feeling like is a better start, or maybe just moving forward? I mean, obviously, it's based off DJ's health, but
I would say for me, both moving forward and this week, it's Ty Johnson to me. Kerryon Johnson is out for basically the rest of the year, if not the rest of the year. If David Johnson comes back and is healthy, Chase Edmonds is nothing, but not that great. He's probably not going to be started. Whereas Ty Johnson, unless, J.D. McKissic becomes the guy, which I don't anticipate either, he's going to be their starting running back, and he's also the goal line back, so you've got the scoring upside there. So to me, not only this week, but for the rest of the year and maybe for the future, I would pick up Ty Johnson personally.
And in this next part of the segment, we'll let you talk about why you would play him this week. So this now we're going to move to the bad. These are players that we don't feel like you should put in your roster this week.
If you have the option.
Well, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So, Adam, kick us off again.
This guy was absolutely horrible this last week, and I loved every second of it, and he's going to be bad again. It's Carson Wentz. So he's playing on the road against Buffalo, who ranks 4th against opposing quarterbacks. I mean, you just watched last week, and that team just does not look like they're in sync. It's almost like they're having, and we constantly hear reports about how they're having inner struggles inside the locker room. Things just don't look good. Their offensive line doesn't look good. They're not running the ball well. So
yeah,
I definitely think that he'll be under pressure a lot, and he will also be seeing ghosts. Sam Darnold won't be the only one seeing ghosts. So.
Okay, so as we alluded to earlier, my bad this week is whoever happens to be the starting running back for the Cardinals, whether it's David Johnson or Chase Edmonds. Even if one of them is a clear, they're healthy, they're going to be the guy, they're playing the Saints, and here's the totals for the Saints for the running backs. Tariq Cohen had 10 yards. Leonard Fournette had 72, which is actually pretty good, but he had 20 carries, and it was a low-scoring game, so he had the option to kind of that game script just worked for that. Mm-hmm. Ronald Jones had 35 yards, and Ezekiel Elliott only had 35 yards on 18 carries. Well, I mean, we're talking about one of the best running backs in the whole league, so with a great offensive line to top it off. The Saints' defense is just great at stopping the run, and with the uncertainty of who's going to be the starter there and this matchup, I'm not touching the Arizona backfield this week.
I completely concur on that. So my guy's Baker Mayfield. I'm sure that if you're a Baker Mayfield owner, you probably didn't want to start him anyway. He's up against the Patriots this week, so sit him now. I mean, there's no sense in being futile here because it's going to be ugly.
Don't even play him as a contrarian DFS pick.
Right. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the last part of this. This is called the ugly. And again, these are players that you may not necessarily want to start, but they're probably going to have a good week. So, Adam?
Yeah, so I'm going to go with Derek Carr. I'm sticking with quarterbacks this week. He's playing Houston, ranked 27th against opposing quarterbacks. And, yeah, he had a good week last week against Green Bay. He just looked good. It was a very fantasy plus matchup, I guess. They're playing from behind a lot, so they got to have lots of time to throw to play from behind. But he ended up putting up 18 points against that good defense. So I looked to him to build off that week or 7 performance.
Yeah, that's not bad against that defense. Right. I mean, we've seen much better quarterbacks not do well. So. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay, my guy this week is the aforementioned David Montgomery. Now, I want to preface this by saying I'm not saying he's going to explode. But he's playing the Chargers, and the Chargers have allowed running backs to beat them this year. Derrick Henry had 90 yards and a touchdown. Benny Snell had 17 carries for 75 yards. That's Benny Snell. And Phillip Lindsay had 114 and a touchdown in their most recent games. These are the guys that are kind of the grinders of the team, not the Tariq Cohens, not the pass-catching backs. These are the guys that want to punch it up the middle. And that's what Montgomery is. He's their, between the tackles type of running back. And, on top of that, we kind of talked about how he's been a disappointment for where he was drafted and what you expected. But he hasn't been awful. I mean, 4 of his 6 weeks, he's had over 8 fantasy points. He's not great, but he's not killing you. So if that's his floor, if his floor is 8 points, I see his upside as being, maybe in the 15 or 16 range. I think he's a good play for someone that I think almost everyone has given up hope on.
Right. Completely predicated on whether or not they run the football.
Yeah.
Because definitely, to your point, we see the value there. They just refuse to use him
the ball
properly.
Yeah.
Hopefully they made a big enough stink about it last week that they'll at least try.
Well, and the thing is, he still looks good when he gets the ball. It's not like he looks awful like Sony Michel where he just doesn't look explosive. He looks good. I just feel like, again, they just need to give him the ball more.
It's the game script, yeah.
Yeah.
So my guy is Kenny Stills. We talked about him a while ago, trending up. He's playing against a weak Raiders pass defense this week. Of course, Will Fuller is out, as Adam mentioned. He could have a big day. I think he's. It's not like he's just coming into the offense. He's been with them all season. He's been learning, what to play, or most of the season. He's been learning, the offense. He's been playing well, and now he's going to get the opportunity. And although he hasn't been great as of yet, he could have a great week. So I'm not saying he's going to have a great week for sure, but if I had him on my roster, I would play him because his ceiling is ridiculously high.
Yeah.
It's as high as Will Fuller's is, and we saw what he did a few weeks ago with 3 touchdowns and 100-something yards. So.
Yeah, and a great matchup.
Yeah,
so.
Right. Okay, Dynasty guys, any last comments?
One thing I did want to point out, we kind of skipped over, but with the Emmanuel Sanders trade, Dejon Hamilton becomes interesting. He is their wide receiver 2 now, and kind of will fill that possession type role. So not saying he's going to be great, but definitely you need to keep an eye on him, and if he's available, go grab him.
Okay.
Good point.
I agree. Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, that's our show for you today. Thanks for listening to our podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Please send us an email at dynastyguysff@gmail.com. That's dynastyguysff@gmail.com. And follow us on Twitter at dynastyguysff. Thanks again for listening, and please join us on our next podcast. See ya.
Appreciate it.
Have a good one.